Hello, 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 and welcome to Mercury Rising with yet another episode of Keeping Up the Moon, the show where we look at what the moon is doing and try to make sense of how that can possibly affect us down here on Earth. This is your host, Joe G, with the best astrological furrow in all of the internet, not just YouTube, because now I have more than YouTube as a social media platform. Well, I have always had it before, but now I have TikTok, and some of these snippets go there too, so I have to be inclusive, you know? Yes, you can follow me on TikTok. It's the same thing as every other place, at Astro Joe G. But if you watch my YouTube videos, you probably don't really need to, because they're just cuts and shorts that come from this video, at least for now. Maybe in the future that will change, but I'm not much of a social media guy, so that's probably not gonna happen. So yes, anyways, with all these announcements out of the way, today we're covering the Sagittarius eclipse, the very last eclipse of this 18-month long cycle. But yes, so without further ado, let's get right to it. So, like always, the best place to start is what is Sagittarius? Well, Sagittarius, like most of us know, is a fire sign, making it dry and hot in quality. I personally believe that Sagittarius is one of the signs where there is little contest when it comes to its fieriness. I think it's both really obvious to see, and I would even go as far as saying that Sagittarius would be the easiest sign to spot in a crowd. Here we see the forwardness of heat meet Jupiter's drive to spread and procreate, if you know any of the Zeus myths. But anyways, in other words, Sagittarius is hyped, and it seeks to make sure that you and everyone else is on that same boat. Everyone should love living life just as much as Sagittarius knows how to. And this is probably why Sagittarius is often famed to be a little bit of a preacher. He is inherently enthusiastic in nature, and the way that Sagittarius displays that is through the need to spread that enthusiasm with everything and everyone in the room. A Sagittarius type of event would be one where everyone is invited, just as long as everyone's sticking to a very strict modus operandi. You have to make this event the best event that's ever happened on Earth. But the thing with the best is that different people would define that differently. And that's probably where we see some of the dryness or the inkling towards separation or individuation be displayed in this particular sign. I personally think that the best type of event would be one where I stay at home, reading some weird, ancient, magical, or astrological book while cuddling with my fiance. But my Sagittarius friends would most definitely disagree, and we've had plenty of disagreements about that. Similar to Taurus, which we covered on the previous lunation, even though Sagittarius is dry, the planet that is responsible for taking care of it, Jupiter, counteracts some of those qualities. As Claudius Ptolemy puts it, Jupiter is moderately moist and exceedingly heating, which contrasts Venus, who is just the opposite. She is extremely moist, but moderately heating. So with this, we see that the dryness inherent to Sagittarius is somewhat mitigated by the presence of Jupiter. Like Ptolemy said, it's only moderately moist. And we frequently mention this in the show, but the thing with dryness is that more often than not, it promotes a certain degree of separation. And the way that I always like to picture it's kind of like a cookie. Like that's so dry and so brittle that once you touch it, it just falls apart, and all you have left is a whole bunch of individualized crumbs. But the thing with Sagittarius, if we continue with that metaphor, is that because there's some moisture implied in that whole metaphor, is that it could be almost like when you dip a cookie into a glass of milk and only half comes back out of it because the other half has converted. They're now milk cookie, a moist cookie. They're the best type of cookie, soggy as hell, but they think they're the best. Some people would also agree. So you see, Sagittarius separates in a rather moist manner. By trying to homogenize a certain substance, it accidentally creates another, the other. Or to put it more cohesively, there's us and then there's them. And that's the big dilemma of Jupiter's diurnal home. Even though it tries to bring everyone and everything together, some things inherently want or even need to be separate in this world of duality that we live in. The symbolism of the sign makes it even more evident since Sagittarius is a centaur, half human, half beast. And with that said, mutable fire can be somewhat challenging to understand. Mutable signs generally have this dual nature to them. So with that, the big question of what is simultaneously fire and something else becomes elucidated. Because Jupiter is often associated with spirituality, faith, and truth, to me, the heat inherent to the sign has to display some of those similar qualities. And although some modernist might shoot me down for saying this, because the symbolism that I'm about to describe is often associated to the asteroid Vesta or Hestia, is that, in my opinion, Sagittarius can be very congruent to the symbolism of the sacred hearth in ancient Greece. In the introduction to her thesis, The Study of the Concept of the Sacred Hearth and Greek Goddess of the Hearth and their association with the Praeneon, its origins and its development, Ezra Chayer describes the gravity of the concept of the sacred hearth as follows. The concept of the sacred hearth is one of the important symbols of the classical Greek city-states. It is believed that the common hearth of the city symbolizes the city, and if the fire of the common hearth dies out, so will the city. Hestia is the goddess of the hearth, domesticity, and family. As being the goddess of the hearth, Hestia cannot be thought separate from the concept of the sacred hearth. My reasoning for drawing parallels between the symbolism of Sagittarius and that of the sacred hearth is because not only is the hearth literal fire, but it also stands for something much greater than that. It's both the goddess and the fire, both the city and the heat of patriotism. It is ultimately a symbol of the family and of togetherness. Through Chayer's illustration of this historical artifact, it's very easy to see that the hearth functioned almost like the metaphorical or metaphysical heart of the city. In other words, if the fire does well, so does the city, and if the city does well, so do the citizens. With that, it's really easy to see how the Sagittarius spirit can be parallel to it, but not just that, also the jovial spiritualism attached to that sign and to the hearth. Now, I hope you didn't get too inspired with that Sagittarian speech. Sagittarius can be, like we said, it's that enthusiasm that seeks to spread, and very easily we can go down a very inspirational route. But the point of today's episode is not really inspirational. Last lunation with the eclipse in Taurus, we also had a little bit of a tease with a benefic ruled lunation. But ultimately, the beneficence brought upon by these signs can be somewhat altered by the effects of the eclipsing going on. The Taurus eclipse happened in the North Node, which, as we discussed, represents this sort of hunger or thirst towards Taurus significations. Now that we're met with the Sagittarius solar eclipse, we're met with very much the opposite of that symbolism. Because after you eat, something always happens. You poop. So this Sagittarius solar eclipse, we're pooping out Sagittarius out of our system. And of course, that's not to say that we're going to get rid of Sagittarius altogether. At the end of the day, poop is just the leftovers, the nutritious stuff, the good nutrients we do keep and nourish ourselves with. Moreover, as I was exploring the South Node in this eclipse and just the position of the moon and all of that, I did realize that there's a little bit of a doubling happening again in this lunation. Last Taurus lunation, we had the full moon happening, of course, at the head of the dragon, but also conjoined Algol, the fixed star that represents the head of the Gorgon. Now, this lunation, on the other hand, which is in the South Node representing the tail of the dragon, is also conjoined a particular fixed star named Al-Wa'id, or Beta Draconis, which is the eye of the dragon in the constellation Draco. Though the South Node very much so represents the rearmost orifice of that said dragon, having the eye of the dragon be a part of the picture in this lunation kind of brings upon those themes of completion a little bit further. Kind of like those child puzzles where you have to connect the dots to make the full picture so you can see it all. We have the tail and we have the eye, so we have the two opposite extremes kind of coming in together, and not through the nodes but through a star, which is a little bit interesting in that sense. But no full picture is full without having some background information, and that's why I did bring my good friend Isha Ramirez back, or good old mythological specialist, to tell us the story. Because last lunation, actually, I did talk about the North Node a little bit, and I did explain a little bit of the symbolism inherent to it, but I didn't go so deep as to talk about the myth, because of course I had to uncover some of the mythology behind Algol. But on this one, we're going to get in true closing in on eclipse cycle fashion. We're going to take a look at this whole dragon and the whole myth behind it. And there's many different myths, but Aisha chose to bring what probably is the most important or the most known draconic myth in astrology, that being the myth of the Indian Rahu and Ketu, which corresponds directly to the north and south node of the moon. So with that said, let's say hello to my friend Isha Ramirez so we can really understand what's behind this whole myth, and we'll also talk a little bit about our own charts and how these eclipses have been affecting us. All right, so you're back in the show. What's up? What an exciting time. I feel so legit having guests, especially guests that know what they were talking about. So that's nice.
Thanks.
No worries. But yeah, so I was just talking about Sagittarius and this whole ordeal. We're going through like the last eclipse of the cycle. It's been 18 months of this nonsense. So it's been great in some regards, but also like not so fun for some people and at some points of the period of the cycle. You didn't see this, but in my script I just talked about how it's really interesting how we have this almost like a completion of the whole dragon, because then we have the eclipse happening in the south node, so that's the tail, but then the star has a little bit of the head, which is the eye. And I think in like a Sagittarian way, it's really this time to like aim and shoot for what comes next in the next sort of cycle. But I still think it's really important for us to understand what the myth is about and what's really what's the vibe and where we're going with this. So yes.
All right. Okay. So the first thing I think about when it comes to like the head versus the tail and all of that is really the turning of the ocean. And I say myth loosely because this is a practice for some people, a religion. So I say this with the utmost respect. It is a story, though, that I think is worth telling. According to sacred texts in India, the turning of the oceanal milk happened when the sage cursed the gods because they offended him. That's a whole nother story. So we'll keep that aside. But so then the gods lost their powers, right? And this is a perfect opportunity for the demons to come and try to take over. They were freaking out because they're like, we're powerless. Like, what are we going to do? So they turned to Lord Brahma and they asked him what they should do. Brahma sends them to Vishnu in turn. And Vishnu is like, all right, I got you. He counsels them and tells them basically, let's scheme and let's tell the demons that if they help us get the Amrit, which is an elixir of immortality, we'll share it with them and we'll all be immortal together. But we're not going to share it. Like, it's going to be just for us because we don't want immortal demons.
Right.
And so the gods are like, bet. They talk to the demons and the demons are like, yeah, for sure, let's do this. Because it's an ocean and it's huge, right? They use a mountain as a rod, and then they use a snake deity to kind of push and pull the rod around so that they can start turning the ocean. His name was Vasuki. It was really difficult for them to do all of this. So Lord Vishnu has to come in a couple of times and help them out. So first of all, they can't move the mountain to the ocean. So he mounts his eagle and he brings the ocean into the mountain into the ocean. And then afterwards, they can't keep the rod steady because it's like it keeps sinking. So then he turns into a turtle and stabilizes it so that they can, do the movements. Finally, everything settled. And then small things start to come out. The first thing that they get, it's called hala hala, which is one of the most like poisonous or venomous substances on the earth. And everybody starts to get sick, basically. They turn to Lord Brahma again and Lord Vishnu, and they're like, what are we going to do? They tell them to go visit Shiva, because Shiva is the only one with the power to not just bring things into life, but also to destroy them. Right. So they're like, he'll likely be able to help. And so he does. He comes in and he actually drinks the potion or the venom. And this is what turns his throat blue, which is why he's, for the most part, depicted as blue in imagery. and religious imagery. So he saves them. But also something I forgot to say. So the demons and the gods each grabbed an end of the snake. The demons thought that it would be a bad omen to grab the tail. So they grabbed the head. And because the snake was with the gods, basically, he was breathing fire and ash throughout the whole ordeal, making the demons weak. So, because remember, the whole point is to kind of like bamboozle them. Then finally, they get these, they're called the ratnas. So these very like sacred objects, which include jewelry, goddesses, cows, elephants, things of that nature, before they get that Amrit. But then finally they get the Amrit. And so this god comes out of the ocean carrying the little vessel with the Amrit. And immediately the demons start to fight. And everybody's trying to get it. And they're like, oh my gosh, like what's going on? So then Lord Vishnu, which is actually very well known for having a lot of avatars, he turns into this beautiful lady called a Mohini. And so as Mohini, he starts to most likely sing, some people say that, entertain them. And as he's singing and entertaining them, he's only giving the elixir to the gods. But this one demon notices, and his name was Svavarnu. And so he changes into a god. He transforms like his outer appearance into a god. And he gets a sip of the elixir. But then the sun and the moon notice because he didn't have the god glow. So sun and moon are like, yo,
I love
that's
that.
not a god. And then Lord Vishnu, Lord Vishnu, who's a badass, he was like, wow, cuts his head off. That's it, like you're dead, right? But he had already drank the elixir of immortality. So he becomes this head separated from this body that we now know as Rahu and Ketu. And so he chases the sun and the moon forever now, because the sun and the moon basically like uncovered his scheme. And because of them, he is now separated and would now be dead. And so that's where we get like a lot of imagery from like the eclipse as the sun being devoured, or the moon being devoured by an entity. And this is just, I mean, I really like this one because it's literally like a dragon. It has like so many moving parts. If we think about other societies, there's a lot of imagery of things devouring the sun whenever it comes to eclipses. Like in Norse mythology, you know, the end of the world will be like when the wolf devours the sun and the earth. And there's like a lot of like animals and entities eating the sun. But I personally really like this one. So that's what that myth is about. I definitely recommend anyone to go look it up. It's amazing. There's so many other things that I did not have time to talk about, but that's really the core of it.
Nice. Yeah, and I think it's always interesting that it is a dragon. I never really thought about it and like as to why it could be a dragon, because like you said, sometimes it's like some other beast, and I think that the point is really that it's a beast of some sort, because it's like, how dare you eat the sun, you know?
Right.
Because I always like to picture in the past, like if you're a person, you don't know any astronomy, you're just minding your own business, and you're used to a full moon always being a full moon and the sun just always being there, and out of nowhere there's an eclipse. I think that everyone would be freaking out.
Right, I would be shook for sure. If I was 100%. One of the first people looking up, I'd be like, whoa, are we about to die?
And especially right now, because we're going through a solar eclipse, so that would be, I think it's only really visible in like Antarctica and stuff like that. But that would be literally the sun going away. So there's that sense of like really just like purging everything, and like the light goes out. And especially because it's in the south node and has this whole idea of decrease already, it is really just like, let's go, that's it. We've had enough, you know? But especially that, because this is the last eclipse of the whole cycle, like what do you feel like people can take out of this myth to get some sense of like closure?
Well, I think it goes back to something you've said in a previous video, actually, which is really like that that head having a mouth and eyes, but not having a stomach or a belly to really like take in the food, or really like sense with the rest of its body what it's supposed to be sensing. And so with Rahu and Ketu, it's always like you gotta find a balance. You gotta make the head meet the body some way, somehow. So I would say wherever this eclipse is happening in your houses and in your signs, then really just take a look at like, how can I find the balance between these two very separate areas in my life, but that are really tying in together right now.
Cool.
I would say that's what I'm doing anyway.
Nice. Yeah, and I was gonna ask if you don't mind sharing any information about your chart, like where's Sagittarius in your chart and how do you feel like clearing it?
It's hitting my 7th house.
Nice.
So my 7th and my 1st house. Yeah. So it's interesting.
Yeah, well, like through that experience of it being in the 7th house, like do you feel like there's something you're letting go of? Like, let's say 7th house is like relationships and things like that, and partnerships. Do you feel like there's an end, kind of?
Definitely. I think because it's Sagittarius and Gemini, which are really about like knowledge and wisdom. For me, it has been letting go of old ideas of what I thought relationships were meant to be. And I mean that with friendships and with people as significant others, and embracing who I am by myself and with others, but really not letting my relationships with others change who I am at my core, because I tend to do that a lot, unfortunately. But these cycles have been teaching me a lot about how to do that and really embrace both others, but also myself.
Right. Really like focusing more on yourself and then have like the others be a secondary sort of thing.
Yeah.
Cool. Nice. Love that. Love that for you.
Thanks.
So like Isha and I talked about, these eclipses can, even though they're happening in the same sign, they will affect different people in very different ways. Contrary to what some skeptics might believe, astrology does account for the disparity between different peoples. It's not just all Sagittarius and all Cancers are going to experience this in the same exact way. And that's why these lunation reports don't give you the full picture of how this eclipse or any other astrological event can affect you, and that's why. Getting a personalized reading is always so much better. And as you know, and if you've been keeping up with the moon with me for a long time, I do offer personalized readings, and I have a few different options, and soon I'll be adding more options to that too on my website, themercuryrising.com. But for right now, I have 1 hour long to 2 hour long readings where we look at your chart, talk about your life, and see where those two can possibly be taking you. And with that too, especially with a 2 hour long session, we can go even into the future, explore some of those timings and some of those cycles, because I'm sure you've noticed life has this very cyclical sort of pattern to it. And if we can study the past, we can get a glimpse into what can possibly be in the future. On top of that, I also do offer a 30% discount for anyone who might be having their birthday within the year. If your birthday just passed, sorry, you gotta pay the full price. But anyways, yes, if you go to my website, you can get all the information you possibly can. As you can watch from my videos, I think I'm a fun guy to talk to. So please go to my website, themercuryrising.com, to support my astrological studies, my astrological endeavors, and to get some help to navigate your life as well. But if a reading does not interest you, or if you don't have the money and you still would like to support me and this channel, you can of course subscribe or just leave a like below. That is just as fine as well. So with that, let's keep going with this Sagittarius eclipse. So this lunation, I chose a native who is both still alive and was also in the news very recently, which was really surprising. I chose her chart a couple weeks prior to the lunation. I'm even recording this video like way ahead of time, which good for me, because I was always rushing. But now I'm on a good schedule, but that doesn't matter. Anyways, so yeah, so the native that I chose is Camila Cabello, who was recently on the news due to her breakup with Shawn Mendes. And because it has nothing to do with the topics of the lunation, I didn't really address it in this native report as we're gonna go through. But if you would like to see me talk a little bit about the astrology of the breakup and what possibly could have, and how you can possibly see that in your chart too, if that's coming up, yes, leave it in the comments. But with that said, there's something that I have to get out of the way with this particular chart. I was a bit hesitant when I decided to pick it because the time that we have is not actually 100% accurate, as the chart database in astro.com suggests the timing that we have has a really wide range of 9 a.m. to 9:50 a.m. in Havana, Cuba. With that, this leaves us two possible ascending times, so we can even have a Taurus or an Aries ascendant for that particular chart. So I had to do a little bit of rectification to make sure that that chart both worked and I was actually providing some accurate information. The reason why I ruled out the Aries ascendant is that if she was indeed an Aries ascendant, the primary significator for the native would be, of course, Mars. And that would put Mars in the 7th place, emphasizing those themes of partnership, relationships, marriage, even with the malefic influence of Mars, this theme of open enemies. And Saturn would also be put in the 1st house, which can make the native a little bit more prone to accidents and bodily issues, among other things. And not just that, one of the big pieces of her career and one of the main sort of significators that we will be working with as we go through the timing techniques, as you're going to see soon, is that Pisces stellium that she has, it would move from the 11th place to the 12th place, which reduces the likelihood for eminence by a great degree. In other words, the Aries ascendant chart would be a lot more harmful for the native than the Taurus one, which wouldn't make sense for someone who is both as popular as she is and who thrives as much as she does. And of course, a disclaimer always needs to happen when we're talking about these things, because I'm pretty sure that someone was bound to be born at that same day with Aries ascendant, and that's of course not the end of the world. But yes, if you were one of those people, please let me know in the comments and share a little bit of your story. It would be like a really great study for you and for me to compare and contrast these two charts. And yes. Anyways, let's move on. One of the things that I really like about the Taurus ascendant chart too is that it draws a lot of parallels with the chart that I covered last week, the chart of George Duke. Both of them have the Sun, Mercury, and Venus co-present in the same sign, and as Valens in his anthology puts it, this configuration or this combination of planets often makes artists and polymaths of some way, shape, or form. George Duke played many instruments and was part of many bands and things like that, and Camila Cabello is also an actress, a singer. She was in a band. She's all up and about, making artsy things. One other thing that's also really noteworthy is the fact that both of them would have the ruler of their ascendant in the 11th place. The 11th house often shows friends and groups, and it's not very surprising that both of them all actually had their careers kickstarted as a result of being in bands. Cabello, of course, was made famous after her appearance in the American reality competition show X Factor in 2012, where she competed alongside her bandmates Ali Brooke, Normani Corday, Dina Jane, and Lauren Hodengui, as the girl group formerly known as Fifth Harmony. From the perspective of annual perfections, that year is actually quite interesting for Camila Cabello, since for her, 2012 would have been a 4th house perfection year. And the first thing that people will often jump to the 4th house is just, you're going to expect something to do with the home, foundations, and things like that. But since her 4th house is ruled by the sun, it would also activate the natal significations of her sun. And her sun is, of course, in a rather decent position, and it's also in that aforementioned 11th place. The 11th place is traditionally known as the place of good spirit, and contemporarily it's referred to as the house of hopes and dreams. With that, this seems rather fitting with the themes of the 11th house also implying some of those band connotations or group connotations, but also because that competition in that year in particular was what really triggered the bands and therefore Camila Cabello's eventual success or fulfilled aspirations. Note the theme of hopes and dreams. Things get even more interesting when we also perfect from her moon, because if we do so, then the moon would also come to the 11th house, further emphasizing the topics of that place. The moon perfecting to the sun's location in a particular chart or vice versa is actually quite the astrological event to look forward to. Since both of them are luminaries or casters of light, they would imply a certain degree of visibility for the native within that given year. In Cabello's case, because the sun is also co-present with Mercury and Venus, we'd expect that visibility to come as a result of endeavors related to poetry, music, speech, or anything to do with the voice in an artistic sort of way. Though there's a few other factors that make this year even more interesting. Unfortunately, Camila's moon was waning or decreasing in light at the time that she was born. And because of the theme of decrease, that can of course hamper some of the victories and the successes of that year. Her sun also doesn't have much support from the planet that's supposed to take care of the house, which is Jupiter, in the 10th place, which makes the planet unable to aspect the 11th place because they're side by side, so they're in the peripherals. But this in conjunction with the moon's theme of decrease can also imply a little bit of a handicap when it comes to reception or support. With that said, Venus, who is also in that 11th place in Pisces, is exalted in that sign, which can be the second best option when it comes to those themes of reception or support. She's not necessarily the best planet because she still does rely on Jupiter by being in that house, but she can still provide some degree of victory, and that's probably why we still see some success come out of that endeavor. And the reason why I mention this is because contrary to what you might believe, due to Fifth Harmony's eminent success, global success even, is that on that actual year, the band didn't win the contest. They actually placed on 3rd place. And that's always a good and interesting thing to think about when addressing astrology in a person's chart. I think that one of the big challenges is seeing not just if you're going to win a certain thing or if you're going to fail, but if you win or if you fail, what comes out of that failure or what comes out of that victory? Because sometimes failures can lead to successes, and successes can lead to failures. And there are so many other factors to this chart that just make it so interesting, especially when looking at that particular year specifically. But because my time is a little bit limited and we already been talking for too long, I can't go there. But despite 2012 being quite the interesting year for Cabello, it's not necessarily the point of this whole presentation on her chart. Because as you can see, the themes of Sagittarius are not necessarily prominent in that given year. So for that, we'll have to skip all the way to 2016 when Cabello actually decided to depart from the group. But because I just tossed you a whole lot of astrological jargon and a whole lot of astrological diagrams, let's take a break for a second and actually take a listen to an interview that Camila Cabello did with Lorraine in 2018 about the reasons why she decided to leave the group.
I'm just thinking back to when Jerry Halliwell left the Spice Girls, and one of the reasons she did it is because she wanted to be able to talk and be passionate about projects that meant something to her.
Right.
Was that part of the reason for you to be able to find your voice in that way?
Not really, because I think I actually wrote an essay about immigration and my family's story while I was in the group. So I did that even while I was in the group. So no, that wasn't really one of the reasons. But I think musically I can do it now, which is something that I couldn't do before because I couldn't release solo music in the group. So now I can do it musically. But I was always able to, speak my mind. So that wasn't one of the reasons. The reason was just that I wanted to be able to express myself creatively, like in any way.
So as we can see, the primary reason why Camila decided to leave the group was so that she could explore herself a little bit more as a solo artist, to explore her own vision, which then, now, we really get to that Sagittarius sort of vibe. And again, through the perspective of perfections, this year becomes even more interesting because she actually decided to leave in 2016 when she was in an 8th house perfection year. That was not only the place where we find her moon, but also Sagittarius. Hence why she has moon in Sagittarius. But because this is a Sagittarius year as well, it would activate Jupiter, who is in the 10th house, and that's the house of career. So we kind of have this interplay between the themes of the 8th house, of other people's resources, shared resources, but also the themes of the 10th house, which is your reputation, your career, how the world sees you, and all sorts of things like that. Here very clearly we see that she had to make some choices in order to actually do what it is that she wanted to do. In many ways, the group was hampering her. But like we said, we were talking about the themes of the 8th house, and the 8th house does embody that sense of like shared resources. And because her moon is waning, like we discussed earlier, we, in a year where we come to the house of that moon, so the 8th house, the Sagittarius waning moon, we'd expect a decrease in shared resources. And of course, I think it's fair to assume that because she left the band, she would stop making as much profit as she was when she was in the band. That's not to say that she would stop making money from it altogether, because to this day, she has songs with Fifth Harmony on Spotify, YouTube, and all other streaming platforms, so she's, of course, still profiting from it, albeit to a much lesser degree. And this is the whole thing that I wanted to illustrate with Camila's story, is this quest for Sagittarius to really chase its own vision, even if it has to make some sacrifices along the way, drop some other people, and like going all the way back to the beginning of that video, is really like creating that othering. Like, yes, we were Fifth Harmony before, but as Fifth Harmony, I cannot be Camila, so I either choose to be the homogenized version of who I can be as a group, or I go with what I believe or what I want to do. And I'm sharing this story and sharing this person's chart now because I'm saying like, okay, we're in a Sagittarius eclipse in the South Node and all of that, and we're being invited to do that. Let's drop everything and go for our vision. That's not the case, because if you remember, we're trying to poop Sagittarius out of our system. So we're trying to not do that. And I'm not trying to say that Camila made a bad choice by leaving Fifth Harmony. Like, if anything, she made a really good choice, because Fifth Harmony is not even a thing really anymore. But it's just to illustrate what sort of thing we're already kind of like drawn to do at the moment. I feel that these days we're very much in the Sagittarius mode as a society. We live in a society. But as a society, we're trying to like adhere to this like one vision. There's only one certain specific way to do things, and this is not, I'm not picking sides here at all, in true Gemini fashion. I think that the general consensus these days is that there is a right way of doing certain things, and there are other ways that are completely wrong. And to a certain degree, that's totally true. Certain things will be inherently negative and will hurt more people, and others will be, even if they require a certain degree of sacrifice, they will be more helpful, profitable, or beneficial to either the individual or the society as a whole. But that in that search of what is the true way to do things, we end up neglecting the fact that truth is so much more complicated than that. So like I said in the last video, whenever we're dealing with the nodes, the thing to do is always to look at the opposite sign. Gemini is the sign that opposes Sagittarius. And one thing that Gemini does really well, that Sagittarius more often than not fails to do, is that Gemini is able to open the space or hold the space for all possible types of information, all sort of types of opinion. And even though people often say that that Gemini is like two-faced or whatever, it's not really that. It's just that sense of like, there is a little bit of truth in everything, and I'm just here to listen, and I'm just here to try and understand like a little bit of everything, or to do a little bit of everything. So to poop house Sagittarius, we have to embrace a little bit of that and be open to alternate points of view, be open to alternate truths and modes of living. Because that's the thing, the Sagittarius thing, like we see in Camila's case, is really good from like a personal level, and that's where that whole dryness comes into play. But as a collective, we're so complex that there will never be just that one true way that will work for everybody. If we really try and analyze the metaphor of the centaur, it would almost be like the horse half just wants to go crazy and be wild, while the human half wants to settle and live a common life. And neither of them will work because they're not two separate bodies. They're one thing, and so they have to learn to coexist and live together. So I think that the motto of this eclipse is to get ready to drop that need to do what you want and what you want alone, and be ready to compromise in some way, shape, or form. Even if it's not the most fun thing to do, it is what we need at this day and age, you know? But yes, that kind of concludes it. That's my point. But just a few closing statements. I was trying to go for the whole remediation thing in the earlier videos, and I know that people loved it. I got some really good feedback from that. But I think I'll save that for later. I think I actually want to do a whole video that kind of goes through how to actually do that, so I don't have to do it every video, because they will end up being too similar. But yes, if you do want that video, I know it's annoying, but like the video, please. And I'll know that with every like, it's a yes, you want a video on remediation and how it works and how art can be a form of remediation. But with that said, I think I kind of rambled too much today. The video is getting super long. But yes, guys, thank you so much for being with me. I had a blast, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.